Picture the worst smell you have ever encountered. Not a quick passing smell you walk through on a hot sidewalk. I mean a smell that has layers. A smell that has been building for years, soaked into wood and stone and cloth and skin. A smell that has become the permanent atmosphere of a place, the way weather is the permanent atmosphere of a country. Got it? Good. Now fill it with human beings. Not dead human beings, though there are those too, in the cemetery out back with the numbered stakes and the unmarked ground. Living human beings. Old ones, mostly. Confused ones. Sick ones. People who built things and farmed things and raised children and went to church on Sundays and voted in elections and loved people who are now dead or gone or simply too busy to come back. People who, at some point, ran out of luck. Add to that the smell of animals, because this is a working farm, and the animals are more profitable than the people. Add mud. Add the particular hollow sound that institutional buildings make, that echo that tells you a place was built not for comfort, but for containment. Add cold. Add hunger that isn't acute enough to kill you quickly, but chronic enough to make you slow. Make you dim. Make you feel like you are slowly being erased. That is the county poor farm, and there were thousands of them. At the peak of the system, around 1880, there were close to 1,200 poor farms operating across the United States. They went by different names: the almshouse, the county farm, the poorhouse, the infirmary, the home for the indigent. But whatever the county decided to call it on the official ledger, everyone in the surrounding towns knew exactly what it was and exactly what it meant when someone got sent there. It meant you had failed. It meant you were done. It meant that every neighbour who drove past the farm on the county road and saw the figures bent over the fields or sitting in the yard with their hands in their laps, every one of those neighbours would feel a cold little shiver of recognition and think, "Not me. That will never be me." And then they would look away and press their horses a little faster. We're going there tonight. Not as inspectors, not as reformers with clipboards and righteous horror. We're going inside. One person, one season. Everything they would have smelled, felt, endured and survived. Or not survived. I make these history stories, and honestly, I never quite know who's listening. Maybe you're someone who works with elderly people and you're trying to understand how we got here. Maybe you're someone whose great-grandmother ended up in one of these places and you've always wondered what that actually meant. Maybe you're just a person who finds something strangely comforting about long, detailed stories told in the dark, which is a perfectly valid way to be a human being. Either way, get comfortable. Pull that blanket up. Here we go. The smell reaches you before the building does. You're sitting in the back of a county wagon, the wooden slats pressing hard into the backs of your thighs, and you've been riding for 2 hours on a road that stopped being a proper road about 6 miles back and became something more like a suggestion. Your hip aches. Your hip has ached every morning for 11 years, since you took a bad fall off a roof in October of 1885, and it's never been quite right since. Your name is Thomas Elias Hale. You're 69 years old, and you were a carpenter for 41 years in Kenton, Ohio, and this morning you signed a piece of paper in the Hardin County Courthouse that transferred your care to the county, and now you are sitting in a wagon with 4 other people who also signed papers this morning, and none of you are talking. There is nothing to say. There is a woman to your left who might be 70 or might be 50. It's impossible to know, because poverty ages you the way weather ages wood. She has a bundle on her lap that she's holding with both arms crossed over it, the way a mother holds a child. You don't know what's in the bundle. You don't ask. There is a man across from you who has not stopped moving since you got in the wagon. His hands are going constantly, picking at the seams of his coat, pressing his palms flat on his knees, lifting them, pressing them again. His eyes don't quite focus on anything specific. He hums sometimes, not a tune, just a sound, low and continuous. The sound of a person trying to stay tethered to something that keeps slipping away. You've seen this before. You know what this is. You look away. The fourth person is a boy, though when you call someone a boy at 69, you mean anyone under 40, and this one might be 35. He has the red-burned face of a man who has worked outdoors and a hand that ends just below the wrist. Mill accident, probably. Or maybe the war, though he seems young for that. He's staring at the floor of the wagon with an expression that is perfectly, carefully blank. And you recognise that expression too because you have been practising it yourself all morning. The fifth person is dead. No, that's not right. She is not dead. She is breathing. You can see her shoulders move. But she's been unconscious since she was loaded into the wagon at the courthouse, and the county man driving the horses has not checked on her once, and you've decided not to think too hard about what that means. The smell hits you around the same time the road curves through a stand of elms and the farm comes into view. Manure, obviously. You're from Ohio. You know that smell. But underneath it, something else. Something that has been cooking for a long time. Something institutional and wet and faintly sour like corn mash that's been sitting, or cabbage that's been boiled past all recognition. And underneath that, something you can't name right away. And then you can, because you spent 6 weeks in a military hospital outside of Richmond in 1864, and you recognise the smell of many human bodies sharing air that doesn't move enough to carry the smell away. Your stomach does something slow and unhappy. The farm is bigger than you expected. The main building is a 3-story brick structure, and at first glance it looks almost respectable, almost like a school or a county office building. There are windows, there is a porch. There is a flagpole in front, though the flag on it is faded to a pale pinkish grey, where it should be red. Someone planted flower beds at some point, though they have not been tended recently and are now mostly dead stalks and weeds. Around the main building at varying distances are outbuildings, a barn with a sagging roofline. A smaller building, you'll learn, is called the pest house, for those with contagious conditions, and you'll learn to walk around it the long way. A smoke house, a woodshed, a chicken coop, and behind all of it, visible over the roofline of the barn, a stand of trees with a low wooden fence around it that you initially think is an animal pen. It is not an animal pen. The wagon stops. The county man climbs down and ties the horses without hurry. He doesn't open the tailgate. He walks toward the porch of the main building and calls out something you can't hear. You wait. Your hip aches. The woman with the bundle pulls it tighter against her chest. The man with the moving hands has, for the first time, gone still. He's looking at the building. His face has something in it now. Some expression you can almost name. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. Something that says, so this is what it is then. A door opens on the porch. A man comes out. His name is Walter Greer, and he has been the superintendent of Hardin County Farm since 1889. He is a large man. Not tall, but broad, with the build of someone who was physically powerful 20 years ago and is now simply heavy. The muscle converted to something slower and softer, but still substantial underneath. He has a beard that is more grey than brown, and small eyes set close together under heavy brows, and his shirt is clean, which will turn out to be notable. He comes to the side of the wagon and looks at the 5 of you the way a man looks at a delivery of goods he ordered from a catalogue. Not unkind, not cruel, simply assessing. "Hale," he says, reading from a paper. "Thomas Hale." "Yes," you say. "Carpenter. Any injuries that prevent physical work?" "Your hip. Your hands, which have been stiffening for years, the joints thick and slow in cold weather. The cough you've had since last winter that hasn't quite gone away." "No," you say. He makes a mark. He goes through the others the same way. The woman with the bundle is named Esther Vogt. German origin, you'll learn, though she's been in Ohio for 40 years. She came in as an insane person, which is the official category for anyone who can't function in ways the county can measure, which in practice means anyone who is deeply depressed or severely anxious or has dementia or is simply too worn down by loss to maintain the performance of normalcy. The man with the moving hands is classified as feeble-minded. The young man with one hand is indigent. That's the official word. Indigent. Without means, unable to support himself. The woman who has been unconscious is, you'll learn by evening, actually dying. She's been sent to the county farm because she has nowhere else to go, and because the doctor in Kenton has determined there's nothing more to be done. She will be dead before morning. This is not unusual. People are sent to the farm to die all the time. It's cheaper than a hospital and considerably cheaper than the charitable alternative, which is a thing this county has never been able to afford. Superintendent Greer checks his paper one more time, makes a final mark, and tucks it into his breast pocket. "You'll be shown to your quarters," he says. "Supper is at 6. Work assignments tomorrow morning." And that is all. That is your welcome to the Hardin County farm. A boy of about 14 comes round from somewhere and leads you inside. The inside of the main building smells worse than the outside. You walk through a door into a hallway, and the smell settles on you like a coat. It's not just one thing, but a layering of everything the building contains. The corn mash smell from the kitchen at the back. Cold smoke from the furnace that heats the building inadequately and incompletely, which you will come to understand fully in about 6 weeks. The smell of unwashed clothing and unwashed bodies, because bathing happens on a schedule determined by Superintendent Greer, and that schedule is, you'll learn, somewhat theoretical. Pine tar soap and chamber pots, and the particular damp smell of a building that was built without proper drainage and has been fighting moisture for 30 years. The wallpaper in the hall is a faded green pattern that might once have been cheerful. It is peeling at the seams. Someone has at some point painted over part of it with a thick whitewash that has yellowed and cracked. The floors are wood, worn smooth by years of feet. They creak in a consistent pattern that you will have memorized within a week, so that in the middle of the night you will be able to tell, by the sound, exactly where in the hall someone is walking. There are people in the hall. 2 old men sitting on a bench along the wall, not talking, their hands in their laps, watching you come through with the flat and curious gaze of people who have seen many arrivals. A woman in an apron who moves through without looking at anyone. Someone else, farther back, who you can't quite make out. The boy leads you up a set of stairs to the 2nd floor and down another hall and stops at a door. "Men's dormitory," he says. He says it without particular inflection, as if this is information rather than a declaration. He opens the door. It is a large room. That's the first thing you notice. Larger than you expected, which in a way makes it worse, because largeness and emptiness go together in here, and the ceiling is high, and the windows are small for the size of the wall, and the whole effect is of a space designed for economy rather than comfort. There are 12 beds in this room, wooden frames, rope-strung with straw mattresses. Each bed has a grey wool blanket and a pillow that is more shape than substance, the stuffing inside compressed into irregular lumps by years of use. 8 of the beds are occupied by belongings: a coat hung on a bedpost, a pair of shoes placed carefully underneath, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Your bed is one of the unoccupied ones, the boy points to it. Second from the window on the left. You set your bag down on it. Your bag contains 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, your Sunday coat which you have been told you won't need, a pair of socks, a Bible, a photograph, and a letter from your daughter in Columbus that arrived 3 weeks ago and which you have read 17 times. The boy points to a peg on the wall above the bed. Your peg, he says. There's 1 wash basin on a stand near the door. 1 for 12 men. Privy's in the yard, the boy says. Chamber pots under the beds for night. Empty them in the morning into the trench out back. He says this the way someone says the sky is blue or dinner is at 6. Any questions? You have about 200 questions. None of them seem like questions this boy can answer. No, you say. He leaves. You sit on the bed. The ropes give under your weight in an uneven way, so that the mattress tilts slightly to one side. The straw inside is compacted, and in some places worn through the ticking, so you can feel the rough texture of the rope through the thin fabric. You sit there for a long moment, your hands on your knees. Outside the small windows, the Ohio sky is the pale, colourless white of early November. The kind of sky that has weather in it, weather coming, though it hasn't arrived yet. The kind of sky that makes the world look temporary. You're 69 years old. You were born in 1827. You have seen a country tear itself apart and put itself back together. You have built houses and barns and churches and schoolrooms. You have driven nails in weather so cold your hammer rang like a bell, and so hot the pitch in the wood ran like water. You buried a wife and 2 sons, 1 to the war and 1 to the typhoid, and you kept working, kept being useful, kept being the kind of man who could be counted on, the kind of man who paid his debts and showed up on time and did what he said he would do. And now you are sitting on a tilted rope bed in the Hardin County Poor Farm, and outside there is a graveyard with no names on the markers, and somewhere downstairs a woman is dying, and the smell will not leave. You open your bag, you take out the photograph. It is a formal portrait, a cabinet card made at a studio in Kenton in 1878. Your wife, Clara. Your daughter, Ruth, age 9 in the photograph. Your son, James, who was already dead when this was taken, but who you can see in Ruth's chin, in the particular way she tilts her head. You look at it for a while. Then you put it carefully in your breast pocket, close to your ribs, and you stand up, and you go to the window and look out at the county farm in the grey November light, and you begin, slowly and deliberately, the way you would begin any large project, to take inventory of what you are dealing with. A county farm is, first and foremost, a farm. This matters. This is not a metaphor. This is not the county calling it a farm, because farm sounds gentler than institution. It is an actual working agricultural operation, and it exists to produce food and income, and the people who live there are expected to work it. This is the theory at any rate. In practice, the situation is considerably more complicated, because the labour force of a county poor farm is not your standard labour force. It consists of elderly men and women whose bodies have been worn down by decades of hard work, people with mental illness in its various forms, people with physical disabilities, people who are sick, people who are grieving, people who have given up, people who are simply profoundly exhausted by a world that has required too much of them for too long. Working this population at full agricultural capacity is, as you will discover, an exercise in extracting whatever is left in people who have very little left. Hardin County Farm consists of 212 acres. 60 of those acres are under regular cultivation, corn primarily, some wheat, a kitchen garden that produces vegetables for the inmates during summer. The rest is pasture for the dairy herd, 23 cows, and the pigs. There are always pigs. Pigs will eat anything, require minimal management, and produce pork that can be salt-cured for winter. In the economy of a county farm, pigs are extremely useful. More useful, in a certain cold accounting, than many of the people. The county has contracted the management of the farm to Superintendent Greer under an arrangement that is more common than it should be, and more corrupt than it appears. Greer receives a fixed payment per inmate per week. The county calculates this payment based on what they estimate bare minimum care should cost. Greer's profit is whatever he can save from that figure. You do the math. Or rather, you don't. Because you're 69 and tired and you haven't been told the official numbers. But you will piece it together over time, the way you piece together what's happening in a building by the way it sounds, by the way the floors feel, by what you can see and smell, and the spaces where things that should be there are absent. The county pays Greer approximately $1.75 per inmate per week. This is meant to cover food, clothing, fuel, medical care, and any other needs. Greer's household eats 3 good meals a day. The inmates eat twice, and what they eat is what the farm produces, supplemented by whatever Greer can purchase at the lowest possible price, which is mostly cornmeal, salt pork fat, dried beans, and occasionally molasses. You're thinking about all of this as you stand at your window on your first evening, watching 2 old men push a wheelbarrow across the yard toward the barn. The wheelbarrow is full of something you can't identify from this distance. The old men are moving slowly, both of them, with the careful, deliberate movement of people whose bodies require management. One of them stops. He sets his end of the wheelbarrow down, slowly, carefully, and straightens up and puts both hands in the small of his back and stands there for a moment, face tilted toward the colourless sky, just breathing, just taking a moment to exist without the weight of the wheelbarrow. Then the other man says something, and the first man bends and picks it up again, and they continue across the yard. You watch until they disappear into the barn. The bell rings for supper. The dining room is on the ground floor in the back of the building. It is a long room with 4 long tables and benches on either side, the kind of setup that suggests military barracks or a school cafeteria, which is the point. Individual tables encourage individual people. Long communal tables encourage efficiency. You find a seat. There are approximately 40 people in this room. You count them automatically, the way a carpenter counts boards, just because that's how your mind works. They're almost all old. A few are clearly younger, but damaged in ways that put them in this category anyway. The mill worker with one hand is here. sitting at the far end of a table and eating with the focused efficiency of someone who has learned not to waste energy on anything that isn't necessary. There are a handful of people who are clearly not entirely present in the way most of the room is present. Blank eyes, hands that move without purpose, occasional muttering, but mostly old people, women on one side of the room, men on the other. This is the rule. Mixed company at meals would apparently suggest something that Superintendent Greer is not prepared to suggest. The food arrives in large pots brought from the kitchen by two women who are themselves inmates, pressed into kitchen service because they are still capable of it. Corn mush, not cornbread. Corn mush, which is cornmeal boiled in water to the consistency of wallpaper paste. Salt pork, not the good salt pork, the trimmings, the fat and the gristle, boiled and then mixed into the mush. A tin cup of something that is either very weak coffee or very strong coffee water. It's impossible to determine which it is because the coffee flavour has been distributed across approximately twice as much water as the flavour can actually support. You eat. The corn mush is warm at least. It tastes of corn and salt and nothing else, and the texture is the texture of something that has been cooked past any interesting quality it might once have had. But it is warm and you have not eaten since 6 in the morning. The man who sits across from you has been here 2 years. His name is Hermann Schultz. He is 72. He was a farmer in Wyandotte County, lost his land to debt in 1887, lived with his son for 3 years, and then his son's wife made it clear, in the way that things are made clear without being said, that this arrangement was no longer workable. Hermann does not seem bitter about this. He seems like a man who has arrived at a state beyond bitterness, some flat country on the other side of it, where the weather is consistent and not particularly interesting. First day, Hermann says. It is not a question. Yes, you say. It's worse in winter. He says this without apparent malice, just information. The heat don't reach the upstairs proper. You'll want 2 blankets. I only have 1. Trade something for another one. The men who work kitchen detail have more access. Sometimes they can get you an extra blanket for a favour. You look at him. What kind of favour? He shrugs. Not bad ones. Nothing bad. Usually just talk. People get lonely. He goes back to his mush. On your left is a man who has not told anyone his name, and whom the other inmates call simply Old Jack, though whether Jack is his name or just a thing they call him, nobody is sure. Old Jack is eating with a speed and concentration that suggests he's worried about the food disappearing, which is a relationship to food you recognise from the war, from the way men ate after days without proper rations, that anxious efficiency. At the far end of your table, a woman is sitting with her head bowed. She's on the wrong side of the room, the men's side, but nobody says anything, because she has been there every evening for a year, and she has never caused any problem, and Superintendent Greer has decided it is not worth the energy to correct. Her name is Dorothea. She was a school teacher for 31 years in Lima. Her husband died, and then her boarding house closed, and then a series of things happened that do not need to be enumerated, because they follow the same pattern as all the other paths that lead to this room, and now she is here, eating corn mush, her hands folded around her tin cup as if holding on to a warmth that is barely there. You notice that she finishes quickly and leaves quickly, eyes down. You'll learn why. After the men who control the best spots at the table have eaten, the quality of what's left in the pots becomes somewhat theoretical. The bell rings at 5:30. It is a real bell, a farmyard bell hung on a post in the yard. and whoever is assigned to ring it, it rotates, you'll discover, does so with considerable enthusiasm, because being the bell ringer is one of the better morning assignments, and you don't want to lose it by doing a half-hearted job. The dormitory comes awake, slowly, in the way that old bodies come awake in cold rooms in November, which is to say, reluctantly, painfully, with a series of small negotiations between the will and the flesh about what is actually possible versus what is required. The temperature in the dormitory is, on this morning, approximately 42 degrees Fahrenheit. You know this, not because there is a thermometer, but because you have been a carpenter in Ohio for 41 years, and you know exactly what 42 degrees feels like on your skin, which is like being touched by something that has been kept in a cellar. Your breath makes small clouds. Your hip announces itself immediately and emphatically. You've slept in your clothes, which is what everyone here does from October through April. This is not considered strange. This is considered practical. You sit up. The ropes of the bed creak and sag. The straw mattress shifts. A man 3 beds over, you don't know his name yet, coughs a long, elaborate cough that sounds like it has been happening for months and has become structural, part of the architecture of his mornings. Your hands are what really tell you how cold it is. For the last several years, the cold has settled into the joints of your fingers in a way that isn't quite pain, but is something adjacent to it. A stiffness, a resistance, as if the joints have decided overnight to partially seal themselves and must now be slowly, carefully coaxed back into function. You flex your fingers. Open, close. Open, close. They move like a mechanism that needs oiling, slightly jerky, slightly reluctant. By mid-morning they'll be better. They always are. But right now, in this cold, they are approximately half functional. You stand. The floor is cold through your socks. There is no rug. Hermann Schultz is already up. He moves with the practiced efficiency of a man who's been doing this long enough that it requires no thought. He splashes water from the basin, cold, of course, onto his face and dries himself on the single community towel hanging on a hook beside it. The towel is damp with other men's morning water. You look at it. You splash water on your face and don't use the towel. The walk down the stairs, down the hall, out to the privy and the yard, back inside, back up the stairs to collect your work assignment. The yard is dark. The sky has barely started to lighten. There is frost on the ground, the stiff white kind that crunches slightly under your feet, and your breath comes out in long visible streams. The cows in the barn are already audible. Someone has already started the morning milking. You look at the yard in the thin pre-dawn light, the outbuildings, the dead garden, the flagpole with the faded flag hanging absolutely still in the cold windless morning. You've built better outbuildings than this. The barn has 3 boards on the south side that are pulling away from the frame. You noticed them yesterday. They need to be pulled, fitted with new wood, re-nailed with 16-penny spikes. The chicken coop has a sill that's rotted at the foundation end. You can see the soft wood from here, and the ground underneath is damp in a way that will spread if it isn't addressed. Your hands are only half working, and you're 69 years old and this is a county farm, and already you are looking at what needs to be fixed. Some habits don't let go. Work assignments are distributed by Greer's deputy, a man named Carl Ott, who is 34 and has the face of someone who has never quite resolved the contradiction between being a decent person and working in a place like this. He is, in fact, a decent person. This is a separate problem from the question of whether this place is decent, which it is not. And the tension between those two facts has given Carlotte the permanent expression of a man with a mild headache. He reads from a list. Hale. Thomas Hale, carpenter experience. Yes. Building maintenance. You'll work with Martin. Martin is a man of 64 who was a general labourer most of his life and knows something about most things, and a great deal about nothing in particular. He nods at you from across the room. He has a hammer tucked into his belt loop the way some men carry a watch. The barn roof, Carlotte says, and moves on. The barn roof. You walk across the yard in the early light, your breath visible, your hands flexing slowly in your pockets to keep the blood moving. Martin walks beside you. He doesn't say much. He has the quality that a lot of the longer-term residents here have developed, which is a kind of conservational economy, a rationing of words the way you ration anything that costs you something. How long have you been here, you ask? 4 years? The roof bad? He considers. It's not good. This turns out to be accurate. The barn roof has been failing for at least 2 years, and whoever assessed it before now either didn't understand what they were looking at or didn't care to spend the money to address it properly. There are sections where the wood has softened and is giving way at the joints. There's active rot in 2 of the rafters. The flashing around the chimney on the south end has pulled away from the masonry, and water has been getting under it and spreading through the sheathing. You look at it for a while. Your hands are still half functional. The cold is still in your joints. But you're looking at a structural problem, and structural problems have always been something you could understand. They have a logic. They have causes and effects and solutions. They can be assessed and addressed and fixed. This is actually the best you have felt since you signed that paper yesterday morning. We need to pull this section, you say, pointing, and this, and we need to check the rafters from underneath, because if the rot's in 2 that I can see, there are probably more. Martin looks at where you're pointing, looks at you. You know what you're doing, he says, not a question. I know what I'm doing. For the first time since you arrived, something in Martin's face adjusts. Not warmth, exactly, but something. The slight recalibration of a man who has identified a competent presence. Greer won't spend much on materials, he says. What do we have? Lumber in the woodshed, some new boards, some salvaged, nails, a couple of hammers and a draw knife. No saw worth using. I'll need a better saw. Greer has one. He doesn't like lending it. I'll talk to Greer. Martin looks at you again with that same assessment. You're a new arrival. You've been here approximately 15 hours. You're already planning to negotiate with the superintendent. All right, Martin says, which, you will learn, is about the most enthusiastic endorsement he ever gives anything. Let me tell you about how a county farm actually works, because the structure of it matters, and the structure of it is one of the most important and least examined systems in 19th century American life. Every county in the United States, under the poor law systems inherited from English common law, had an obligation to care for its indigent residents. This is a legal obligation. Counties can't simply let people starve in the street. Or rather they can, and sometimes do. But there's at least a framework of law saying they shouldn't. The question is, how to fulfill this obligation at what cost? The answer that most counties arrived at sometime in the late 18th and early 19th centuries was the county farm. The logic was actually elegant in a cold-blooded way. You have a population of people who need shelter and food. You have land the county owns. Why not combine these things? Put the people on the land, have the land feed them, and if there's surplus, sell it. The inmates are cared for. The county breaks even, or maybe even profits. Everyone goes home satisfied. Except for the inmates. But in a certain kind of accounting, the inmates' satisfaction was not a primary variable. The bidding system made it worse. Many counties didn't operate the farms directly. They auctioned the management contract. Whoever would take the lowest payment per inmate per week got the contract. This is exactly what it sounds like. A system that actively rewarded the operator who could keep costs lowest, which in practice meant the one who could keep the inmates' living standards lowest. The food budget was the easiest place to cut, then the heating budget, then medical care, which was provided by a county physician who visited when called, which was not often, because calling the doctor cost money the superintendent would rather not spend. The system produced, reliably, conditions that a later generation of reformers would call scandalous, which is an interesting word for something that was not accidental but designed. Greer is not an evil man. This is important to say because the easiest version of this story is the version where there's a villain who is evil and a system that is neutral, and if we just remove the villain, the system would work fine. That's not what's happening here. Greer has a wife and 3 children. He goes to the Methodist church in Kenton on Sundays when he can get away. He does not, as far as you can observe, enjoy the suffering of the people in his care. He is simply a man who has organized his life around the requirements of a job that requires him, structurally, to provide the minimum possible. He also has a very nice house for a county employee. It sits just north of the main building, separate, with a proper garden and a woodpile that is significantly larger and better organized than the woodpile for the rest of the farm. His children eat well. You notice these things. You can't help it. You've been a labourer all your life, and you know exactly what things cost and exactly what it looks like when someone is living substantially better than the budget they're supposed to be managing. 3 weeks after you arrive, you have earned a small reputation as the person to go to if something needs fixing. This happens organically. Word gets around the way it does in any small community, the way it always gets around in any confined space where people have limited options for interest. Thomas Hale was a carpenter. He knows how to fix things. He fixed the door to the women's dormitory that had been sticking for 8 months. He's working on the barn roof. He made a suggestion about the drainage problem near the woodshed that Carlotte passed along to Greer, who had it addressed after only minor resistance. This is, in the economy of this place, a form of currency. It doesn't get you better food. It doesn't get you more heat. It doesn't get you respect from Greer, who tends to regard you as a useful tool, which is at least a step above how he regards some of the others. But it gets you something. It gets you information. Because people talk to people who do things. The man who tells you about the pest house is named Robert Avery. He is 61 and was a school teacher and still carries himself like one, with a preciseness of speech and a particular way of looking at things that suggests he is always simultaneously experiencing something and cataloguing it. He tells you about the pest house on a Thursday afternoon when you're working on the eastern wall of the barn, and he's keeping you company during a break, sitting on an overturned bucket with his hands around a tin cup of coffee that is at the far edge of being warm enough to still count as hot. There's a man in the pest house, he says, been there 3 months. His name is Ezra Whitfield. He was a blacksmith in Dunkirk. The county physician says he has tuberculosis, which is why he's in the pest house and not the main building. You look up from the board you've been examining. Is he being treated? Avery gives you the kind of look that says, "What a question." "He is being housed," Avery says carefully, "in the pest house." The pest house is a small wooden structure at the far northern corner of the property. Single room, a cot, a bucket, a small stove that may or may not be keeping the space above freezing, a window. The county physician comes every 2 weeks. Whitfield cannot work, obviously. He is ill. He's in a building by himself, separated from the general population, which is the medically correct response to tuberculosis, but which also means he is separated from general human contact, which is its own kind of harm, layered on top of the disease, layered on top of the isolation that brought him here. Someone brings him meals, you ask? Carlotte does, in the evening. Does anyone else go to him? The physician, a pause. Sometimes Greer for the paperwork. Another pause. Me. You look at him. I go every 2 or 3 days, Avery says, with the same careful precision he uses for everything. I bring him things to read when I can find them. We talk. He was a reader, Whitfield. Educated himself. You'd be surprised. He takes a sip of his cooling coffee. Or perhaps you wouldn't. You think about Ezra Whitfield in his small wooden building, 3 months in, the cold coming through the walls, the cot, the bucket, the stove that may or may not be adequate. He knows he's not getting out, Avery says. Does anyone get out? It's a genuine question. You've been here 3 weeks and you've not seen anyone leave. You've seen 2 people arrive. You have seen, from a distance, 1 person carried out wrapped in a sheet. Occasionally, Avery says, someone's family comes to their senses, or someone gets better, which does happen, it's not impossible, or someone has a relative who can take them in. Or, he glances at you, or they die here. That's the more common exit. He finishes his coffee. Whitfield would like visitors, he says, if you had any spare time. You think about your hands on this November afternoon, how they have remarkably become more functional over the last 3 weeks, not because the cold has lessened, it has actually gotten worse, but because you have been using them consistently, working them through their stiffness every day, and the movement has kept them from seizing as badly as they did that first morning. You think about what spare time means in a place where time is mostly accounted for. I'll come, you say. The pest house smells of illness and pine wood and something medicinal that might be a poultice, or might just be something Whitfield has been given to believe is useful. It is approximately 16 feet by 14 feet. You've built sheds bigger than this. Whitfield is a man who, you can tell, was large before the illness had its way with him. He still has the frame, big shoulders, big hands, the architecture of someone who worked with iron and fire for 30 years. But the covering has diminished. His face is all angles now. His hands, when he moves them, look too big for his wrists. He's sitting up in the cot when you come in, because he heard you coming. He has a book open on the blanket over his lap, though the light in here is not really sufficient for reading. Robert said you might come, he says. His voice is still solid. Whatever the tuberculosis has taken, it hasn't taken his voice yet. I'm Thomas Hale, carpenter, Ezra Whitfield, blacksmith. He says it without irony. Present tense. That's who he is. You pull the 3-legged stool from the corner, the only seat, and sit down, and you talk. The thing Whitfield wants to talk about is not his illness and not his situation and not the county farm. The thing Whitfield wants to talk about is metallurgy. He has been reading, he tells you everything he can get, which is not very much because books are not plentiful here. But Avery brings him newspapers and occasional magazines, and Whitfield has been reading with the focus of a man who has a great deal of time and a strong need to put his mind somewhere other than his circumstances. He has been particularly interested in the recent developments in steel manufacturing, the Bessemer process, Andrew Carnegie, the changes in how American iron is refined and used. It changes everything, he says, and you can hear in his voice the particular passion of a man who spent his life working with a material he loves and is watching that material transform into something he can barely recognize. The forge I learned on, the way I learned to work iron, it's already obsolete, already in my lifetime. The things those mills are producing now, the tolerances, they're achieving. He stops to cough, once, a single productive cough that he handles efficiently and without drama. When I started, a good blacksmith was essential. Now they're building machines to do what I did, better than I did, faster. Doesn't that bother you, you ask? He considers. The light in the pest house, thin and grey from the small window, lies across him in a stripe. It should, he says, but I can't quite make it bother me the way it probably should, because the thing they're making is remarkable. The thing they're building, he pauses. I just wish I could see what it turns into 20, 30 years from now, what it looks like, what we make with it. He won't see it, of course. You both know this without saying it. But the fact that he wants to, the fact that he is still oriented toward the future, still curious about what comes next, still reaching forward in his mind toward something he won't live to see, this strikes you as one of the braver things you've encountered in a long time. You visit him twice a week after that. December arrives with the particular Ohio winter that you know from decades of experience and have never found any way to fully prepare for. The cold is a different quality now. Not the crisp, clear cold of November, which has some cleanness to it, some honesty. December cold in Ohio is the wet kind, the kind that comes in sideways on a northwest wind with ice crystals in it, that don't quite qualify as snow, but also don't qualify as rain, that find every gap in your clothing and sit there against your skin. The dormitory is 42 degrees on a good night. On a bad night, you wake at 3 in the morning and your breath has formed a thin layer of frost on the blanket near your mouth. The man 2 beds over, his name is Frederick Baum, age 76, formerly a farmer in Hardin County itself, now an inmate of the county farm that sits on land that was once partly his, which is an irony nobody seems particularly interested in pointing out. Frederick Baum sleeps with his blanket wrapped around his head and his knees drawn up, a shape that suggests he is trying to become as small as possible, which is correct, because smallness conserves warmth. You have, following Hermann Schultz's advice, acquired a second blanket. The acquisition involved a conversation with one of the kitchen workers, a man named Pete, age unknown but probably not more than 40, who has a bad leg from some old injury, and who has been on kitchen detail long enough to have accumulated a small reserve of blankets that nobody has asked about. What Pete wanted in return was conversation, not about anything in particular, just someone to sit with him for half an hour in the kitchen after the supper dishes were done, while the fire in the kitchen stove was still burning, and the warmth was still real, and there was no work left to do. Just 2 people sitting near a warm thing in a cold building, talking about whatever presented itself. His life before, the farm he grew up on in Seneca County, the mule he loved with an unreasonable intensity, the way you can love animals when your emotional options are limited, the woman he almost married in 1874. You sit with him twice a week. The blanket is worth it. The cold gets into your hip in December in a way that is qualitatively different from what it does in the other months. In summer and fall, the hip is a manageable problem, a background presence, something you work around, adjust for, learn to carry. In December, the hip is a foreground problem, a weight, a thing with its own demands. You wake some mornings and the joint is so stiff that getting out of bed requires a process. Sit up first, let the blood move, flex the knee slowly, slowly, flex the ankle, place the foot on the floor, feel the shock travel up through the joint, give it a moment, give it a breath, and then stand. Every morning in December, this process. Every morning you stand in the cold dormitory and flex your hands and catalogue your hip and tell your body what is required of it today, and your body negotiates, and eventually you reach an agreement and proceed. The barn roof is finished. You and Martin finished it in the last week of November, working as fast as arthritic joints and a limited supply of nails would allow. Greer's good saw was produced after you had a direct conversation with Greer in which you explained very specifically that without the saw, the repair would take 3 times as long and cost more in the end. And Greer, who responds to economic arguments the way a compass responds to north, produced the saw. The barn roof now does not leak. This is a genuine accomplishment. You stand outside on a grey December afternoon and look at the repaired section, and you can see where your work is. You know your own work the way you know your own handwriting. And the work is good. The boards are fitted tight. The flashing is properly lapped. When the snow comes, and it will come, this section will hold. Greer does not say anything about it. But Carlotte, when he passes you in the yard one morning, stops for a moment and says, "Good job on the barn," which is more than you expected. The graveyard is at the back of the property behind the stand of elms. You go there on a Sunday afternoon in December, not because you were directed there or because anyone suggested it, but because you have noticed it from the window of the dormitory and you've been thinking about it. It is a small plot of ground, maybe half an acre, enclosed by a wooden fence that is in better repair than most of the other fences on the property, which you suspect has more to do with county regulations about the official marking of pauper graves than with any particular concern for the dead. The markers are wooden stakes, not headstones, not crosses in most cases. Wooden stakes with numbers painted on them, the numbers corresponding to entries in a ledger in Greer's office that records number, name, date of death, cause of death if known. Number 1 is at the far back corner. The stake is old, the wood weathered to grey, the number barely legible. You count the stakes, 73. This farm has been operating since 1872, 18 years, an average of roughly 4 deaths per year, though you'll learn from Avery, who has a scholar's interest in data and has looked at the ledger when Greer's office was unattended, that the rate was higher in the early years when the building was worse, and in certain winters and in the year there was an epidemic of something that swept through the dormitories and took 7 people in 6 weeks. The ground is frozen solid now. You reach down and press your hand against it. You think about the people under here, about the fact that their families, if they had families, may not know they're here. That a parent or a sibling or a child somewhere might wonder, years from now, whatever happened to Thomas, or Ezra, or Herman, or Frederick, might go to the church records and find nothing, might ask around and receive the vague answer that he went to the county farm eventually, yes, toward the end, went to the county farm, as if it's a place you go to temporarily, like a hospital, as if it's a station you pass through on your way somewhere else. You stand there in the cold, your hands in your pockets, your hip complaining. Number 73 is a fresh steak. The paint is not fully dried. You were here when number 73 arrived. She was the woman in the wagon who was already unconscious, the one nobody checked on. She died that first night, just as you thought she would. Her name, according to Avery's information, was Margaret Schwartz, age 66. Cause of death, general debility, which is a phrase that means the doctor wasn't there and nobody knows exactly, and it costs more in paperwork to be specific. You think about Margaret Schwartz dying in a room somewhere in this building on your first night here, while you were lying on your tilted straw mattress listening to a dormitory of old men breathe. You've not thought of yourself as a man who's afraid to die, but standing here in this frozen graveyard with its numbered stakes, you think, I would prefer a marker with my name on it. That seems like a reasonable thing to want. On a Tuesday, in the second week of January, a carriage comes up the county road and stops in front of the main building. The effect is immediate. You're working in the barn when Carlotte comes in at a walk that is very close to a run. Carlotte is a man who does not run as a point of personal dignity, so this is significant, and tells you and Martin that the county inspector is here, and would you please move the worst of the stored equipment to the back of the barn, and perhaps organise the hay into something that looks intentional. Martin looks at you. You look at Martin. Move the broken cart behind the rear partition, you say to Martin. I'll stack the hay. This is how it works. You've never seen an inspection before, but you've been in buildings before where someone important was coming to look, and you know exactly what this involves, which is put away the things that tell the truth and put forward the things that tell the story you want told. Greer is already on the porch when the inspector comes. You can see him from the barn door, a different posture than usual, more upright, something in the set of his shoulders that is performing a kind of earnest competence. His wife is visible briefly in the window of their house, watching. The inspector is a man from the county board named Mr. Aldrich. He is, from your distance, a man in his 50s with good clothes and the particular manner of someone who inspects things professionally but does not particularly enjoy it. That specific quality of wanting to complete the task without looking too hard at anything that would require him to take action. This is not a criticism. This is an observation about what happens when oversight is performed by people who are part of the same system they're overseeing. Greer takes him through the main building first. You know this because later that evening Avery tells you, with his characteristic precision, exactly what happened. Because Avery has the ability to be present in a room without being particularly noticed, which is a skill that requires a certain kind of deliberate self-erasure, and Avery has had 4 years to practice it. The women's dormitory had been swept. The dormitories that were usually cold had, for the first time in 2 months, been provided with additional fuel, coal brought up from the basement in amounts that would not normally be allocated until the temperature dropped below a certain point that Greer had apparently determined in his own mind as the threshold between ordinary cold and actionably cold. The corn mush at noon on this day had molasses in it. You noticed this. You tasted it and thought, the inspector is here. The dining room tables had been wiped down. The floor had been swept. The peeling wallpaper in the main hall, which had been peeling for at least the entire time you'd been here, had been not repaired, but pressed back against the wall and tacked at the edges in a way that suggested repair, without actually constituting it. Aldrich walked through the men's dormitory. He looked at the beds. He did not check under them, where the chamber pots are, which would have told him something about how often they are actually emptied versus how often they are supposed to be emptied. He walked through the kitchen. The two women who do kitchen work were in clean aprons. This was noted. He asked Greer questions from a printed form he carried on a clipboard, and Greer answered them. Average weekly cost per inmate, medical visits per month, deaths in the preceding quarter. He said 3, which is technically accurate if you count only the quarter, and don't count Margaret Schwartz, who technically died on her first night, and might not have been fully registered yet. At no point during the inspection did the inspector visit the pest house. You know this because you watched the entire inspection from various vantage points around the farm, moving naturally, working, being visible without being present enough to be noticed or spoken to. The inspector did not ask about the man in the pest house. The inspector did not ask about the graveyard. The inspector did not ask about the heating situation, which is the most important question, because it is January, and there are elderly people in a building where the heat, on most mornings, is 42 degrees. He spent approximately 2 hours at the farm. He shook hands with Greer on the porch. He got back in his carriage. He drove away. Greer stood on the porch and watched the carriage go. Then he turned and went inside. That evening the coal allocation returned to normal. By morning the dormitory was 42 degrees again. The molasses did not reappear in the corn mush. Let me take you out of the farm for a moment. Let me tell you about the scale of what we're looking at. Because the individual experience matters, and the structural reality matters, and they are not separate things. In 1880, the census of the United States counted 66,203 people living in almshouses and county farms. 66,000 people. By 1890, the number had grown. More counties, more farms, more people running out of road. The majority of the people in these institutions were elderly, not criminal, not insane, not incapable of functioning, or at least not initially, just old, and at some point without the resources or the family support to keep going independently. The story of how that happened is also the story of industrialization, and of a rural economy changing faster than the people in it could adapt, and of families under the strain of poverty making impossible choices about who they could care for and who they couldn't. It's the story of a country that had decided at some fundamental level that the elderly poor were a problem to be managed rather than people to be cared for, and that the cheapest possible management was good enough. The reformers were already starting to notice. Frederick Howard Wines, who did the 1880 census work on pauperism and crime, wrote a report that described conditions in many county farms as inadequate, unsanitary, and morally indefensible. He was polite about it because he was writing a government document, but the data he compiled was unambiguous. Dorothea Dix had spent decades earlier in the century fighting for better treatment of the mentally ill in institutions, and she had succeeded in getting several states to build separate state hospitals, which was supposed to remove the most vulnerable from the county farms. In practice, it helped some and didn't help others, because the county farms remained the catch-all for everyone the new state institutions didn't take, which was most people, because the state institutions filled up too. The fundamental problem was money. Or rather, the fundamental problem was the assumption that the minimum amount of money that would technically sustain a human life was the appropriate amount to spend on a human life. That assumption ran very deep. It ran deep enough that when reformers wrote about poor farms and described the conditions, the most common response from county officials was not, "We will improve conditions," but rather, "These people should be grateful to have anything at all." As if gratitude for being kept alive was the reasonable expectation. As if the people on these farms had somehow forfeited their claim to being treated as full human beings by having the bad judgment to grow old without sufficient financial resources. It is February. You know it's February because you've been counting. The night Frederick Baum dies is a Tuesday. You know he is in trouble before you go to sleep because his breathing has changed. He has had a bad cough since November, the kind that sounds structural, the kind that lives in the chest rather than the throat. And over the weeks it has gotten progressively worse in the way that things in this building get progressively worse. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with that slow, consistent deterioration that you stop noticing individually and only perceive when you compare now to 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Frederick Baum walked out to the barn and back without stopping. Tonight he is not walking anywhere. His breathing is wet and slow when you go to sleep. Hermann Schultz, across the room, is also listening. You can tell by the quality of his stillness, which is the stillness of a man pretending to sleep rather than the stillness of a man sleeping. You wake at some point in the early morning. The dormitory is very quiet, not the quiet of sleeping men, the other kind. You lie still for a moment. Then you sit up. Hermann is also sitting up across the room, a shape in the darkness. Neither of you speaks. You get up. Your hip, in the cold, is very bad this morning. You stand for a moment by your bed, one hand on the bedpost, letting the blood move, and then you walk the few steps to Frederick's bed. He is very still. His hands are folded on the blanket. This looks deliberate, but it isn't. It's just the last position they came to rest in. You stand there. Hermann is beside you now. Neither of you says anything. The man in the next bed over is awake, you can tell, but he doesn't move, doesn't look. This is a thing people learn in places like this, how to not see things, because seeing things requires a response, and response requires energy, and energy is not infinitely available. You pull Frederick's blanket up a little higher. It doesn't accomplish anything. It is a gesture in a place that has very little room for gestures. Then you go to the door and call down the hall for Carlotte. Carlotte comes up in his nightclothes, because it is 4 in the morning, his face still soft with sleep that is rapidly being replaced by the particular set expression that this job has given him. He looks at Frederick for a moment. Then he goes downstairs to get the ledger. Frederick Baum, age 76, former farmer of Hardin County, Ohio, is entered in the ledger under his number. Cause of death: pneumonia, suspected. The county physician will come on his scheduled visit in 6 days and confirm or modify this entry. You go back to your bed. You do not sleep. Outside, somewhere in the dark distance, a cow is lowing in the barn. The sound carries through the February air, low and continuous, with no particular urgency. Just the sound of a living thing making itself known in the dark. Here is something nobody tells you about living in a place like this. The hardest thing is not the cold. It is not the food. It is not the work. Though the work is hard on a body that has already been used for 69 years. It is not even the loss, though there is loss constantly. The slow attrition of the people around you, the numbered stakes multiplying in the frozen ground. The hardest thing is the identity question. Because who are you in here? In Kenton, you are Thomas Hale, the carpenter. People knew what that meant. They knew what kind of work you did, what your reputation was, whether you were reliable and honest and skilled. Your identity was stitched into the physical world around you. The houses you'd built, the churches you'd worked on, the barns still standing because you'd built them right. Here, you are an inmate. You are a number in a ledger. You are a labour unit to be assigned to a task. You are a cost being managed. The question of how to hold on to Thomas Hale the carpenter when the world that made that identity visible is 22 miles away and receding is not an abstract question. It is a daily practical challenge. And you notice, watching the others, that different people handle it differently. Hermann Schultz has largely stopped trying. Not in a dramatic way. He didn't give up. He didn't collapse. He just gradually let go, the way you let go of a rope when your arms give out. He is present. He does his work. He eats his food. But the specific identity of Hermann Schultz, farmer of Wyandotte County, seems to have retreated somewhere interior, somewhere that doesn't require maintenance. Robert Avery has done the opposite. Avery maintains himself with almost aggressive precision. He speaks correctly all the time. He keeps his clothes as clean as the facilities allow. He teaches informal reading lessons to two of the younger inmates who can't read, not because anyone asked him to or because there's any practical benefit to him, but because a schoolteacher teaches, and if he stops doing that, he stops being a schoolteacher, and he is not prepared to stop. You find your own answer in the work. Every fixed board on this farm is a statement. Every nail properly driven. Every repair that holds through a hard winter. You're not invisible in the work. The work is visible, and if you know how to read it, it tells you who did it. You build things because you are a builder, even here, especially here. In March, Ezra Whitfield dies. It is not unexpected. By February, he had stopped being able to sit up for your conversations, and you started sitting on the floor beside his cot instead, close enough to hear him when his voice got soft. By the last week of February, he was sleeping most of the time, waking for short periods, sometimes lucid and sometimes not. The last coherent conversation you have with him is about steel, about what the Bessemer process is doing to the American economy. He had read something in a newspaper Avery brought him, something about Carnegie's production numbers, and he wanted to talk about it. You don't know much about steel production, but you let him talk. He talks for about 20 minutes, slowly with effort, stopping to breathe, but with that same orientation toward the future that he always had. What it would mean, where it was going, what would be built. Bridges he sees at one point, the things they're going to bridge with this material. Then he sleeps. He dies 4 days later, in the night, the way Frederick Baum died, and the way most people die here, quietly, in the dark, with the sound of other people's breathing around them. His stake in the graveyard is number 78. Carlotte painted his name on it, not just a number. He did this without being asked, without it being required. Just Ezra Whitfield, blacksmith. In small letters at the bottom of the stake, you notice this. You don't say anything to Carlotte about it. You just notice it, and you think, this man is trying within what the job allows. And what the job allows is not much, but a name on a stake is something. March breaks slowly in Ohio, the way it always does. 3 steps toward warmth and 2 steps back. A week of mud followed by a week of refrozen mud. The kind of unreliable progress that tests you, but it breaks. And when it breaks, you feel it in your hip before you feel it in the air. The hip loosens. Not completely, not like it was at 40, but enough. enough to walk without the process, enough to get out of bed in the morning and stand without that first full minute of negotiation. You stand in the yard one morning in late March and feel something that takes you a moment to identify. It's the sun. Actual warmth from it. Not just the theoretical warmth of a sun that is technically present but too far gone to matter. Real warmth, landing on the top of your head and on your shoulders, and you stand there with your face tilted up and your eyes closed, and you feel it. You're 69 years old, and you have felt the spring sun approximately 68 times before this, and this one feels like the first time. This is what cold does to you. It makes warmth remarkable again. Around the farm, things are stirring. The cows, who have been in the barn since November, are being let out to pasture in the mornings now, and they emerge with the elaborate, awkward happiness of animals who've been confined too long, kicking up their heels, literally like calves. The kitchen garden is being turned over by the women who handle it, working in pairs with long-handled forks, turning the heavy winter soil, their breath still visible in the morning air but only barely. Martin has found in the woodshed a collection of tools that have been there for who knows how long, rusted and neglected, and he has brought them to you with the air of a man presenting something important. There are 3 hand planes, an old draw knife, a brace and bit set, most of the bits still usable, a mallet, the head loose but fixable. You spend 3 mornings cleaning the rust off, working oil into the metal, resetting the blade in the largest plane, tightening the mallet head. When the plane is done, when you've honed the blade back to a working edge and tested it on a scrapboard and felt the curl of wood come up thin and sweet-smelling and clean, you feel something that you will not name out loud, but that the photograph in your breast pocket would understand. It is April when Avery brings you the newspaper. Not a current one. Newspapers here are always at least a week old, passed from the county to Greer to Carl Yacht, and eventually to the inmates in a condition that reflects their journey. But the date on this one is April 1890, and Avery brings it to you with a specific purpose. There's an article, he says. The article is from a reform publication. It describes the conditions of county farms in Ohio and Indiana and Michigan and Illinois, based on a survey conducted by a charitable organization. The language is careful. These were published documents, and the organizations publishing them understood the limits of what could be printed and provable, but the facts it presents are not ambiguous. 67% of county farms surveyed provide inadequate heat in winter months. 44% have no physician on retainer, relying instead on occasional county physician visits. In over half of the farms surveyed, the weekly food budget per inmate falls below the standard established by the survey organization for minimum nutritional adequacy. The average mortality rate in county farms is significantly higher than in the general elderly population. You read it slowly. Avery sits beside you, waiting. They've known for a while, Avery says when you finish. There have been surveys before. There have been reports before. The problem is that knowing and caring are different processes. Who wrote this? The organization is called the Ohio Humane Society. They're associated with the reform movement, charities, church groups. There's a state senator in Columbus who's been making speeches about it. And Avery adjusts his glasses. He does this when he's about to say something precise. This senator is making speeches. The organization is doing surveys. The conditions of county farms in Ohio continue approximately as before. You fold the newspaper. You think about Frederick Baum's stake in the frozen ground, and Ezra Whitfield's stake with a name on it, and the inspector who came in January and did not visit the pest house. What would actually change it, you ask? Avery thinks for a long moment. Money, he says finally. A fundamental redistribution of what the government is willing to spend on old people who run out of resources. Not charity, not reform, a structural change. He pauses. I don't know when that happens, or how. He picks up a corner of the newspaper. But it has to, eventually. Because the alternative is this at scale, forever, and that's not. He stops, starts again. That's not a society that can look at itself honestly. He stands. He straightens his coat with that precise habitual gesture. I'm going to check on the kitchen workers, he says. Good evening, Thomas. He walks away. You sit with the newspaper in your hands for a while longer. The sun is going down. The light through the windows of the main building is turning that particular Ohio spring gold. The light that makes even institutional brick look almost warm. Outside somewhere, a whippoorwill is calling from the tree line. You listen to it. In May, a letter comes. You have written to Ruth in Columbus 3 times since you arrived. You're not an elaborate letter writer. 41 years of carpentry does not necessarily produce elaborate letter writers. But you have written, and you have told her what is true, which is that you are managing, that the work keeps you purposeful, that you have found people worth knowing. You have not told her about the cold in February. You have not told her about Frederick Baum or Ezra Whitfield. You have not told her about the inspection. There are things a father doesn't tell his daughter. Her letter is 4 pages in her careful schoolteacher's hand. She teaches in Columbus, has for years, and she writes the way teachers write, clearly in complete sentences, with a precision about details that tells you she has thought about what she wants to say before she says it. She writes about her students, about the school building, which is apparently in need of repair in ways that would interest you professionally, about a concert she attended, a visiting orchestra, which she describes with the particular delight of someone who does not have access to concerts very often and savours them when she does. And then, near the end, I've been thinking about what you wrote in February, about building things even now. I understand what you mean. I think about Mamma sometimes, about how she kept the house even when it was very difficult, how she made a home out of whatever circumstances allowed, because that was who she was and where she was didn't change it. I think you are the same. I don't think a county farm changes who you are, Papa. I think you are still the man who built the Whitings barn with a bad shoulder in 1879 and who put the steeple on the First Methodist in 3 days when the weather turned. I think that man is still there, in whatever he's doing right now. You read this paragraph 3 times. Then you fold the letter and put it with the photograph. There is a wooden water tower on the south end of the property. It was built in 1885 to serve the main building, connected by pipe to a cistern in the basement. It is approximately 35 feet high, which makes it the tallest structure on the farm by about 20 feet. It is also in need of maintenance, and in late May, Greer tells Carlotte to tell you to take a look at it. The climb up takes your hip approximately 3 times as long as it would have taken you at 50. But you get there. And from the top of the water tower, in the clear May morning, you can see for miles. This is Ohio farmland. It is not the dramatic landscape of somewhere like Colorado or West Virginia. It is not the grand visual theatre of a mountain range or a coastline. It is fields and sky and the long horizontal distance of a country that was cleared, generation by generation, to be made useful. You can see the county road that winds away to the northeast toward Kenton. You can see several farms in the distance, their buildings small and white against the green of the fields. You can see a church steeple above a tree line that suggests a small town you've never visited, probably 6 or 7 miles away. You can see closer the farm itself. From up here, with the distance that elevation gives you, you can see something you can't see from inside it. The shape of the place, the arrangement of the buildings, the logic of the layout such as it is. You can see where it could be better. Not just the building maintenance though, that's there too. Visible and specific from up here in ways that the ground level doesn't give you. You can see where the drainage should be redirected to stop the dampness in the east wing. You can see where 3 of the outbuildings are positioned in a way that catches wind and funnels it directly into the dormitory windows in winter. You can see where the kitchen garden could be expanded, and where the expansion would be sheltered enough by the existing buildings to allow an additional growing season. You pull a small notebook from your pocket. Martin gave it to you. Salvaged from somewhere, the first 30 pages used, but the rest still clean. You carry a pencil. You sit on the edge of the water tank, which is not safe, and look out at the world and sketch. Not the landscape. The farm. What it could be with different hands and different decisions. Where you would put a proper greenhouse for winter growing. How you would redirect the drainage to stop the damp from the east. Where the fence should go to make the chicken yard more efficient and less labour-intensive. Things that will never be built, probably. But the act of seeing them. The act of looking at a space and understanding it and imagining what it could become. This is something nobody can take away. This is still Thomas Hale, carpenter, still looking at a thing and seeing its structure and its possibilities. You sit up there for an hour. The sun is warm on your back. The May wind moves through the fields below you. A long, slow wave moving through the new grain. Far away, almost too far to see, a hawk circles in slow, patient spirals over something in the grass. You think about Ezra Whitfield, wanting to see what steel would build. You think about the bridges. Let me take you forward for a moment. The county poor farms did not last forever. The reform movement that Avery read about in the newspaper, the surveys and the speeches and the charitable organisations, they were the beginning of a long, slow push toward a different kind of answer to the question of what a society owes its elderly poor. In 1890, the same year you arrive at Hardin County Farm, there are close to 1,200 poor farms in the United States. In 1910, there are slightly fewer, as some states begin to build specialized homes for specific categories of people. The First World War changes things slightly, because the question of what the country owes its veterans creates a context for thinking about what the country owes its old people more generally. But the real change comes in 1935. The Social Security Act. Not a charity, not a reform, a structural change. Exactly what Avery said was needed. A federal program that gives old people a baseline income, not enough to be comfortable, but enough to not be completely dependent on the charity of family or the management of county officials. Enough to stay in their own houses, or in boarding houses, or in small rented rooms. Enough to not have to sign the paper at the county courthouse. The poor farms begin to empty. By 1940, the population has declined dramatically. By 1950, many have closed entirely. By 1960, the institution that housed 66,000 people in 1880 is largely a historical footnote. Not a beautiful footnote, a cautionary one. Because the thing that replaced the poor farms was not some perfect system. It was nursing homes, which had their own problems, and Medicaid, which was inadequate in its own ways, and the ongoing American argument about what the elderly poor deserve, which has not been definitively resolved. But the numbered stakes in the graveyard, the Thomas Hales and the Frederick Baums, and the Ezra Whitfields and the Margaret Schwartzes, they are a record of what it looks like when a society decides that the minimum technically possible is good enough. The stakes are still there in some places. A few county farms still stand, converted to other uses now. County offices, senior centres sometimes, which is not without irony. Occasionally preserved as historical sites. If you go to the right Ohio county and find the right field behind the right building, you can still find wooden stakes with numbers on them. The paint mostly gone now, the wood grey with age, the numbers barely legible, but there, still there, a record. The evenings in summer are long. This is one of the things summer gives you that winter doesn't. The long, slow evenings, the light lasting until 9 o'clock, the warmth that actually reaches the upstairs rooms and makes them livable, rather than merely survivable. You sit on the porch of the main building in the evenings when work is done, in the wooden chair that someone built and that you have repaired twice now, in the company of whoever else is out here. Sometimes Herman, sometimes Avery, sometimes Pete from the kitchen, who sits on the steps with his bad leg stretched out in front of him, watching the road. Nobody talks much, but nobody is alone. That's the thing. You've come to understand over these months what the evenings are for. Not for grand conversations or revelations, just for the company of other people in the same situation, the quiet solidarity of shared presence, the way it means something to not be the only one sitting in the dark. You think about Ruth in Columbus, at her kitchen table, probably reading or writing letters. You think about the farm you grew up on in Seneca County, which someone else farms now, or maybe nobody farms. Maybe it's overgrown and gone back to whatever Ohio wants to be when people let it. You think about the church you built in Kenton in 1873, the one with the steeple that you put up in 3 days when the weather turned. It's still there. It'll be there long after you're not. The congregation will walk through its doors on Sunday mornings and they won't think about who built it. And that's all right. That's correct. A building doesn't need to carry its carpenter's name to carry his work. The work persists. The evening light dies slowly, degree by degree, the way it does in Ohio in July. The sky moving through blue and gold and orange, and finally the particular deep blue that comes just before dark, the blue that has some darkness already in it but hasn't fully committed. A bird in the elm tree at the edge of the yard sings 5 notes, stops, sings them again. Let me take you back to June, back to the body of it, because the body of a place like this is not just the cold, not just the grief, not just the numbered stakes. It is also the daily physical reality of the work, and the work in summer is its own kind of thing entirely. June in Ohio is serious heat, not the dry, clean heat of somewhere western and spare. Ohio summer heat is wet. It comes up from the ground as down from the sky simultaneously, and meets in the middle at the height of a person, which means the height of you, working in the fields with a long-handled hoe in the kitchen garden at 8 in the morning when it is already 80 degrees and humid enough to wring water from the air with your hands. The kitchen garden is your new assignment since May. Carlotte made this decision on the basis that the garden needed someone with enough physical sense to manage the planting layout properly, and that you appear to have that, and that the older inmates on garden duty needed direction. You have never been particularly interested in gardening, but you look at the layout of the half-acre kitchen plot, the rows that have been put in at irregular intervals, the companion planting that is completely random, the watering logic that suggests nobody has thought about where the slope goes and where the water actually ends up, and the carpenter part of your brain that cannot look at a structural problem without starting to solve it takes over before you can stop it. By the end of June, the garden is organised differently. The tomatoes are now in the south-facing bed where they'll get full sun. The asins are planted at the fence line where they can climb without support structures that nobody has time to build. The squash is at the edge of the plot where its sprawling vines won't choke the vegetables that need clear soil. The watering has been redesigned so that the downhill slope carries water from the pump toward the beds that need it most, using small channels you've cut with a spade. Greer notices none of this specifically, but the kitchen workers, in September, will notice that the yield is better, and one of them will mention it to Carlotte, who will put it in his mental ledger of things that Hale does without being asked that make the farm function better. But what nobody tells you about summer gardening with arthritic hands is what it actually feels like. The long-handled hoe is manageable. Your hands can grip it. Though by midday the grip has become mechanical rather than natural. Your fingers locked around the wood rather than holding it the way you used to hold a hammer, with the easy authority of 30 years. The harvesting is harder. Picking beans requires a grip and twist motion, repeated hundreds of times, that by the end of the first day has left your hands feeling as though someone has packed the joints with gravel. Not a sharp pain. A grinding, deep, systemic ache that begins at the fingertips and works itself back through the palm and up the wrist. You don't stop. You pick beans at the pace of a man who has decided to keep picking beans, which is slower than you were at 40, but faster than some of the others here, and you work until the bell rings for dinner, and then you straighten up slowly, the small muscles of your back adding their own opinion to the morning's accounting, and you carry your basket to the kitchen. The woman who receives it is named Harriet. She's one of the kitchen workers, a small, precise woman of about 60, who was once a farmer's wife in Wyandotte County, and who has been running institutional kitchens since she arrived here 2 years ago, because Harriet is the kind of person who, when placed in a kitchen, automatically begins to run it. She takes the basket of beans and looks at them. Good size, she says. This is the equivalent from Harriet of a standing ovation. Be more tomorrow, you tell her. She nods once and turns back to her stove, which she manages with the focused intensity of a general managing a campaign that is going somewhat better than expected given the available resources. The stove is a large cast-iron range. Old, one of the burner plates cracked, and replaced with a piece of flat iron that doesn't sit quite right and creates an uneven heat. The heat from it in June is considerable. The kitchen in June is approximately the same temperature as the dormitory in February, just in the opposite direction. Harriet does not complain about this. You have not heard Harriet complain about anything. This is, you have come to understand a specific kind of strength, the strength of a woman who has decided that complaint is a luxury she cannot afford, and so has simply opted out of it entirely and applied that energy elsewhere. You respect this. You have been trying to do the same thing. On summer evenings, on the porch, when the work is done and the heat has shifted from unbearable to merely present, people talk. Not always, not necessarily. But the long evenings make space for it, the way cold doesn't, and over the summer months you accumulate the stories of people around you the way you accumulate anything. piece by piece, without forcing it, just by being present long enough. Hermann Schultz lost his farm to debt, you know. But what you come to know over time is the specific texture of that loss. The drought in 1886 that took 2 consecutive harvests. The loan from the Kenton Bank that seemed manageable in a good year and wasn't in 2 consecutive bad ones. The son, not a bad son, Hermann is careful to say this, not a bad son, just a son with his own 3 children and his own mortgage and his own calculations to make, who took Hermann in for 3 years and fed him and housed him, and was kind about it mostly, until it wasn't possible anymore. The wife didn't like it, Hermann says one evening without bitterness, just stating a thing. She never said so to me, but I could tell. I could see it in her face when she cooked for one more, when she washed for one more. She wasn't wrong to feel it. They were stretched. He looks at his hands. I told him it was all right, that I'd go to the farm. I told him I didn't mind. A pause. He believed me, Hermann says. That's the part I think about sometimes. He believed me. Robert Avery's story is different in the way that a schoolteacher's story is different from a farmer's, not better or worse, just organised around different kinds of loss. Avery taught for 23 years at a school in Lima. He was considered good. He had the esteem of his students and the respect of his community. He had a small house, modest but his own. He had a pension of sorts, not a formal one, but an informal understanding with the school board that if he continued in his position until 60, they would provide some support in his retirement. The school board was replaced in 1887. The new board, in the process of reviewing expenditures, encountered this informal arrangement with Mr. Avery and decided it didn't appear anywhere in the official budget and therefore didn't exist. Avery was 61. He had $600 in savings and no pension. He taught for 2 more years, until his health made it impossible to continue, and then his savings lasted 18 months. And then he had a conversation with his landlord that ended badly, and then a series of events that do not need enumeration led to a courthouse and a paper and a wagon. The interesting thing, Avery says, and he says interesting the way a scientist says it, meaning a thing that reveals something about the structure of the world, is that I did everything right. Every decision I made was the correct decision. I saved. I worked. I maintained my professional standing. I did not drink or gamble or fail in my responsibilities. He straightens his glasses. And here I am anyway. Another pause, which tells you something about the nature of individual choices and structural conditions, which is a distinction that our society has a great deal of trouble maintaining. He says this without apparent anger, just the particular tone of a man who has examined a thing carefully and arrived at an accurate conclusion that happens to be about his own life. Pete's story, told over the course of a dozen evenings in the kitchen after dishes, in small pieces the way you'd add wood to a fire, is a labour story. He worked in a mill in Findlay for 12 years. Good work, steady work, better paid than farm labour. The mill was owned by a man who was neither particularly good nor particularly bad, just a man who made decisions about his mill the way businessmen made decisions about their mills in 1880, which was, whatever keeps costs down and productivity up. Pete's leg was broken in a mill accident in the autumn of 1882. Not badly, it healed, but not well, not quite right. And afterward he couldn't keep pace with the work the mill required, and the mill let him go. He found other work, briefly. Then injury compounded on circumstance compounded on the particular misfortune of being a working man in an era when working men had no protections, no insurance, No compensation for the incapacity of the body that their work had used up. He is 41 years old. He is, in the formal language of the county farm, indigent. "The leg's not that bad," he says once, pressing on it with his fingers, experimentally, the way you'd press on a wound to assess it. "I can work. I do work. It's just—" He searches. You get behind, and then you can't quite catch up, and then you're behind again, and eventually behind is where you live. He pours 2 cups of coffee. The coffee in the kitchen, at this hour, is the real kind. Harriet's doing. You drink it. Outside, the summer dark hums with insects. "How long do you think you'll be here?" you ask. Pete looks at his cup, looks up. "I don't know," he says. "I used to think about getting out, finding something." He shrugs. "The longer you're here, the more the outside gets like something that happened to someone else." He says this without drama, just the flat fact of a world contracting. In July, a woman comes to the farm. She's not a county inspector. She's not a physician. She arrives in a hired buggy on a Thursday morning in the second week of the month, wearing a good dress, carrying a notebook and a leather bag, and she tells Greer that she is representing the Ohio Woman's Christian Temperance Union and its associated charitable committee, and that she would like to speak with the residents. Greer is not pleased. You observe this from the barn, where you're repairing a stall gate that has been giving way at the hinge. The conversation between Greer and the woman takes place on the porch and involves postures that you can read from 50 yards even without hearing the words. Greer's posture is the posture of a man who is calculating what he is legally required to permit and what he can reasonably refuse. He permits the visit. Her name is Mrs. Agnes Whitaker. She is perhaps 45, with the specific manner of a woman who has been doing charitable work for years. Not condescending, not uncomfortable, but with a particular focused quality. The quality of someone who is here to see something and is going to see it regardless of how it is presented. She walks through the building. Unlike the county inspector, she opens doors. She visits the women's dormitory and talks to Esther Vogt for 15 minutes. You learn this afterward from one of the kitchen workers who was present and watched through the door. She visits the kitchen and talks to Harriet. She visits the dining room and looks at the tables and the benches and the pots. She visits the pest house. The pest house now contains a different man than Whitfield. His name is Samuel, and he arrived in May with something that may or may not be tuberculosis, but that the county physician has placed in the pest house out of caution. He has been there 6 weeks. He has seen the county physician twice. Mrs. Whitaker spends 20 minutes in the pest house with Samuel. When she comes out, she's writing in her notebook. She finds you in the garden, which is where you are in the afternoon. She comes round the corner of the main building with her notebook open and stops when she sees you. "You're Mr. Hale," she says. "I was told to find you. Carlotte said you know the farm." You straighten up. Your back makes a comment about this that you ignore. "I know the farm," you say. "I'd like to walk through the buildings with someone who can tell me about the physical conditions, the maintenance, what has been repaired and what hasn't." You look at her. You look at her notebook. You think about what Greer's reaction will be to you providing this information to a woman with a notebook. "All right," you say. You walk her through the buildings. You tell her what you know, which is what you've fixed, what still needs fixing, and what has not been addressed, because addressing it would cost money. You are not inflammatory about it. You're a carpenter. You describe structural conditions the way a carpenter describes structural conditions, specifically, accurately, without embellishment or dramatics. The east wing drainage problem, which you solve partly but not fully, because solving it fully would require installing French drains along the foundation, which Greer has not authorised and will not authorise. The window sashes in the women's dormitory, 3 of which don't fit their frames properly, which means they cannot be fully sealed in winter. You show her the gaps, visible daylight along the edges, not large gaps, but in a February cold the size doesn't matter. It's the principle of the drafts, the cumulative effect of a dozen places where the outside gets in. The cellar, where the coal is stored, which is damp in ways that affect the coal's burning quality and therefore the heat produced by the furnace. The furnace itself, which is 22 years old and operating below efficiency, which means it requires more coal to produce less heat than it should. Mrs. Whittaker writes all of this down. She asks precise questions. She does not react emotionally to what she's being told, which you appreciate. She is cataloguing. She's building a document. What would fix the window situation, she asks. The sashes. You give her a number, materials and labour. She writes it down. And the drainage? You give her a number for that too. She looks at the figure, then looks at you. Mr. Hale, she says, what does the county pay for this farm's operation annually? You don't know the exact figure, but you know the per inmate rate, and you know the population, and you can do the arithmetic. You give her the approximate number. She writes it down. She looks at both figures. I see, she says. The tone is the tone of a woman who already knew approximately what she would find and has found it. What happens with what you write, you ask? It goes in a report. The report goes to our state committee. The state committee presents it to the legislature. And then? She closes her notebook. And then, she says carefully, some legislators read it. Some don't. Some act on it. Most don't, or not quickly. The process is, she pauses. Long. She looks at you. But the reports accumulate, she says, and eventually there are enough of them that the weight of them becomes difficult to ignore. How long does eventually take? She doesn't answer this directly. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hale, she says. This was very helpful. She walks back toward the main building. You watch her go and you think about the report and about the state committee and about the legislators who may or may not read it. You think about the word eventually and what it means in years. Then you bend back to the garden. The beans are coming in heavy today. Here is a thing you learn by October. The county farm's food situation is not a matter of a bad cook or poor planning. It is arithmetic. $1.75 per inmate per week is the county's payment. This is the figure that was arrived at in 1878, when the current management contract was written, and it has not been revised since, despite inflation and the rising cost of certain goods. $1.75 per week is 25 cents per day. 25 cents per day is the food and housing and fuel and medical care and clothing and everything else that a human being requires. In 1890, the wholesale price of cornmeal in Ohio is approximately 85 cents per 100 pounds. Salt pork, the cheap kind, the trimmings, runs approximately 6 cents per pound. Dried beans are 4 cents per pound. Molasses, when it appears, is 30 cents per gallon. You do not do this arithmetic because you are bitter. You do it because you are a person who has always known the cost of things, who has always understood that a building is only as good as its materials, and that the materials you can afford determine the building you can build. And what you can build at 25 cents per person per day is corn mush and salt pork, fat and dried beans, twice a day, with molasses on special occasions that seem to coincide with county inspections. You can keep a person alive. You cannot keep a person healthy. You cannot keep a person warm enough, because warmth costs coal, and coal costs money, and the coal budget is part of the same $1.75. You cannot keep a person socially sustained, which is not a line item anyone tracks, but which is as real a need as calories. The gap between keeping alive and keeping well is not philosophical. You can measure it in Frederick Baum's frozen dormitory in February. You can measure it in the pest house. You can measure it in the graveyard behind the elm trees where the stakes now number, as of October 81. Greer is not evil. He is just a man operating a system designed to minimize expenditure, doing what the system rewards. And the system in turn was designed by a county government that was doing what its system rewarded, which was keeping taxes low and appearances adequate, and the uncomfortable reality of old age and poverty in a moving, industrializing America out of the central view. The poor farm is not an accident, it is an answer. It is the answer a society gives when it has decided that the question of old age and poverty is not its central concern. The 2nd October is different from the 1st, not in its physical qualities. It is the same Ohio October, the same northwest wind beginning to find its edge, the same light going amber and then thin, the same trees doing their annual spectacular before the long grey, different in how you experience it. The 1st October you were still a new arrival. Everything here was overlaid with the strange doubled quality of the alien. You were seeing the farm through the lens of somewhere else, measuring it constantly against Kenton, against the life you'd had, against what a place should be. Every detail registered as departure from a norm. The 2nd October. The farm is the norm. This is not comfortable to recognize. You recognize it anyway, because you are a man who has always preferred accurate information to comfortable information. The farm is the norm. Your body knows these buildings. Your hands know their way around in the dark. You wake at the right time before the bell, as if the farm's schedule has been absorbed into your circadian rhythm and made its own. You know, without looking, that the furnace is due for cleaning. You can hear it in the quality of the heat it produces, a slight inefficiency in the drawer, the sound of a mechanism working harder than it should. You'll tell Carlotte this week. You know that Hermann Schultz has been having more trouble with his left knee since September and is walking differently, and that if it gets cold quickly this year, before he adapts, he'll have trouble. You know that Harriet is rationing the beans more carefully than usual, which means the autumn supply came in slightly short, which means winter will require more cornmeal substitution than last year. You know these things the way you know the house you built for the Whitings, or the school in Dunkirk, or the church in Kenton, as a structure you understand from the inside. This is its own kind of knowledge. It is not the knowledge you wanted, but it is the knowledge you have, and you have always been a man who works with what he has. There is a maple tree at the edge of the kitchen garden. It was there before the farm, probably. Before this building, before this county. Just a tree doing its tree business at the edge of a field that used to be something else, and is now this. In October it goes red. Not orange red, not yellow red, but the particular deep arterial red of a red maple in peak colour. A red so saturated it almost looks like the tree is warm from inside. You stop and look at it one morning. The first morning it really goes. You have passed this tree most mornings for a year. You know which roots surface and which don't. You know the way its lowest branch angles south, and would be good for hanging tools if anyone ever got around to putting hook on it. You look at it now, and it is extraordinary. Not because the tree has changed, because you have been paying enough attention to notice. One evening in November, the 2nd November, you're on kitchen duty because Pete is sick and the schedule has been shuffled, and Herman comes in to get a cup of hot water, which is what people do here instead of tea because tea is not in the budget. He sits across from you at the kitchen table. You're both quiet for a while. Then Herman says, without apparent preamble, "My wife used to make a potato soup on cold nights. Not fancy. Just potatoes and onion and a little pork and whatever else she had. But the way she made it." He wraps both hands around his cup. "I've tried to explain this to people and they don't understand. It wasn't a special recipe. It was just... she made it the way she made everything, which was with complete attention. Whatever she was cooking, that was the thing she was doing. Not thinking about something else, not just getting through it." He looks into his cup. "I can remember exactly what the kitchen smelled like when she made it. Exactly. I can still..." He stops, starts again. "It's a strange thing, smell. How long it lasts. How it can take you somewhere that's completely gone otherwise." You think about the kitchen on Elm Street in Kenton. Clara's kitchen, the particular smell of bread baking. "Yeah," you say. "I think about her every day," Herman says. 51 years and every day." He finishes his hot water. "Good night, Thomas," he says. He stands up slowly, carefully, his left knee giving its opinion, and he walks out of the kitchen with the deliberate pace of a man carrying something he has chosen to keep carrying. You sit at the kitchen table for a while longer. The stove is warm. The kitchen is the warmest room in the building at this hour, with the day's cooking still in the metal and the coals still alive. The single lamp on the table makes a small circle of yellow light. You pull your notebook from your pocket, the one Martin gave you, with the first 30 pages used. You've been writing in the back pages. Not a diary exactly, just things you're thinking about, sketches of structures, occasional notes. You write 51 years and every day. Then you put the notebook away and go upstairs. You should know about the children. County farms received not only the elderly, they received everyone who, in the accounting of the county, couldn't make their own way. The children of poor families, orphans, children whose parents were here, institutionalized alongside them, children who arrived alone. The practice varied by county. Some sent children to separate orphanages, some sent them to farms for indenture, a practice that sounds like something from an earlier century but that persisted in various forms into the late 1800s. And some kept them on the county farm, in the main building, sleeping in dormitories with the elderly and the mentally ill. At Hardin County there are, in your time there, between 3 and 7 children at any given moment. They are, by the official logic of the institution, there to receive care and potentially to earn their keep through small tasks. In practice, they are children living in an institution designed for adults, surrounded by grief and illness and dementia, with no school, limited play, and the particular education that comes from witnessing, at close range, what the end of a human life looks like when it arrives in poverty. You watch them, not intrusively, but you watch. There is a girl named Clara, the coincidence of the name is not lost on you, who is 8 years old and has been here since March. Her mother is in the women's dormitory, unable to care for herself due to something the physician calls melancholia, but which looks to you like a grief so total it has become physical. Her father is somewhere that nobody can account for. Clara spends her mornings following Harriet around the kitchen. Harriet, who does not waste anything, has put her to work doing things an 8-year-old can actually do. Washing potatoes, fetching eggs, stirring things that need stirring. Harriet never speaks more than necessary, but she teaches by proximity, and Clara follows her with the focused attention of a child who has decided that learning something useful is better than standing in the middle of a place she doesn't understand. You teach Clara how to use a hand plane. This happens by accident. You're working on the kitchen windowsill, which has begun to swell in the summer damp and stick in its frame. And Clara is there because Harriet has sent her outside for 10 minutes, and she has nowhere to go and no one to go to, and she watches you work. "What does that do?" she asks. "Takes a thin layer off the wood so the window fits better." "Why does it stick?" "Wood absorbs water, gets bigger. Then it doesn't fit the space it was built for anymore." She watches this for a while. "Can I try?" You look at her. She's 8, which is old enough, and she has been watching you work carefully for 3 minutes, which is actually good attention for 8. You show her how to hold it. The angle of the blade, the direction of the grain, how you feel the resistance change when the blade catches wrong. She takes her first pass. It's not good, but it's not catastrophic. She takes another pass. Better. She looks up at you. "Is it right?" "Check the window," you say. She puts her small hand on the window frame and pushes. It moves more freely than it did before, though it still sticks. "Not done," she says. "Not done." You agree. She takes another pass. You fix the windowsill together in the end. It takes longer than if you'd done it alone. But Clara goes back inside with a look on her face that is the look of someone who has done something real with their hands for the first time. That specific satisfaction that has no substitute and cannot be performed. Harriet looks at her when she comes in. "Your hands are dirty," Harriet says. "We fixed the window," Clara says. Harriet looks at her for a moment. "Wash them before you touch anything in my kitchen," she says. Which, from Harriet, is approximately, "Well done." There is a thing that nobody at the county farm says directly, but that everyone knows. The thing is, the people who run this place, Greer, the county board, the legislature, are not waiting for you to get better. This is different from a hospital. A hospital has, at least in theory, the goal of your recovery, your exit, your return to the life you came from. A county farm has the goal of your management, your containment, your maintenance at the minimum viable level until you're no longer in need of management, which means until you die. This is not said. It would be impolite to say it. It would be, in the language of 1890 Ohio, unchristian, which is the most powerful social accusation available. The official position of the county and of Greer and of everyone associated with this institution is that they are providing care, that the residents are receiving assistance, that the farm is a home for those who need it. But you've been a carpenter for 41 years. You know the difference between a building that is maintained for long-term use and a building that is being maintained just long enough. You know it in the quality of the repairs, in where the money goes and where it doesn't, in the decisions made about what's worth fixing properly and what can be held together just well enough. This place is being maintained just long enough, which means long enough for you, not for the building which will outlast you, for you. The understanding of this is not a crisis. It lands not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of something you have known without fully articulating. You sit with it for a few days, then you go back to work because the chicken coop sill has finally rotted through to the point where it needs proper replacement. not just patching, and if it isn't dealt with before winter, the whole coop. Structure will start to shift. You request materials from Greer through Carlott. You get most of what you need. You fix the chicken coop sill. The chickens continue their chicken business, indifferent to the infrastructure that supports them, as chickens do. The second winter comes. You're more prepared for it. 2 blankets from the beginning. The arrangement with Pete has evolved into a regular standing thing. You sit with him twice a week in the kitchen after dishes, and you talk about whatever presents itself, and he gives you access to the kitchen's warmth on those evenings, which is worth more than any blanket. Your hands this second winter are better than the first. Not better in the sense that the condition has improved. It hasn't and won't. Better in the sense that you know now how to work with it. You know the sequence: flex, warm, flex, move, and you know how long it takes each morning, and you have built that time into your routine so that it doesn't feel like an obstacle anymore, but just like a step. Like greasing a tool before use. Hermann Schultz's knee is, as you expected, worse. He has been given a cane by Carlott, who found one somewhere in the building's accumulated possessions, and Hermann uses it without comment, the way Hermann does everything. The dormitory settles into its winter configuration. 12 men, 12 blankets, some have 2. The rhythm of the coughing and the breathing and the settling of the old building. On the coldest nights, and there are cold nights, the frost on the blanket kind, you lie still and you catalogue the sounds. The furnace pulling, the wind in the eaves, the intermittent creak of boards contracting in the cold, the sound of 12 people breathing. You have become, without deciding to, a kind of keeper of this place. Not in any official capacity, not in any way that Greer acknowledges or that Carlott would name. Just, you know the building, and the building seems to know you back, in the way that things know the hands that tend them. When the furnace pulls wrong, you hear it. When a window begins to loosen in its sash, the sound of wood moving against wood in a way it shouldn't, you hear it. When the drainage is building up behind the east wing again after the rain, you can see it from the dormitory window and you report it before it becomes a flood. The farm functions better than it did when you arrived. Not well. Not the way a place should function when it is housing human beings who deserve adequate care, but better. You have, in the space of a year and a half, done what you always did. You looked at a structure with problems and you addressed the problems you could address with the materials and the tools and the authority you were given, and you let go of the problems you couldn't address. Because a carpenter knows that some repairs require a level of intervention that is above the maintenance tier. What this farm needs, fundamentally, is a different budget and a different contract and a different county policy. You cannot provide those things, but you can keep the barn roof from leaking. And on a February night when the temperature drops to 10 degrees and the wind is coming from the northwest and the furnace is working at its aged best, a barn roof that doesn't leak is worth something. Ruth's letter, the one that comes in March of your second year, is the longest she's written. She has been corresponding with a woman she met through the church, she writes, a woman involved in charitable work, and this woman has connected her to the Reform Committee that is working on the Ohio poor farm question. She has, Ruth writes, been to a meeting. I want to tell you what they talked about, Papa, because I think you will want to know. They talked about legislation. There is a proposal being discussed to require counties to meet minimum standards for heating and food, with inspections by state inspectors rather than county inspectors. There is also a proposal to raise the per capita payment, though this one faces more resistance because it costs more money. The people at this meeting believe these things can pass in the next few years. They may be right, they may be optimistic. I cannot tell which. She pauses, and you can feel the pause in the letter, the way you can feel someone gathering themselves. I think about you there every day. I think about what you said, about fixing the barn roof. I have been telling people at the meeting about you, not in a pitying way, in the way of, here is a man who is still being useful, still being himself, in a place that was designed to forget that he is a person and not just a case number. They said they wanted to include something about that in their report, the reality of what it means to be a person in one of these places who still has things to offer. I told them you would say that you're just doing carpentry. You read this 3 times. I told them you would say that you're just doing carpentry. She knows you. 41 years since she was born, and she still knows you better than most. You put the letter in your breast pocket, with the photograph and the earlier letter. You go back to work. April in Ohio has a smell that is specific to Ohio and to the particular combination of thaw and mud and new growth that Ohio produces in its springs. It is the smell of something returning, not coming for the first time, returning. The specific quality of a smell that the earth makes when it is warming from a long cold, releasing what has been locked in it since October, the complicated organic smell of renewal that is also, if you're paying attention, slightly the smell of decomposition, because renewal and decomposition are the same process viewed from different ends. You stand at the edge of the kitchen garden in early April, looking at the soil that you turned over last fall and amended as best you could with what the farm had, mostly composted material from the barn, some ash from the furnace, and you feel something. You feel interested in the season, in what's about to happen in this half-acre of Ohio dirt, in the particular optimism of a garden in spring, which is not an ignorant optimism, not the optimism of someone who doesn't know what can go wrong, but the specific optimism of someone who has grown things before and knows that some significant percentage of the time they come up. You make a plan for this year's planting, not a mental plan. You draw it in your notebook. The beds, the rows, the rotations from last year, where to move the tomatoes so the soil doesn't get tired, where to add squash that wasn't there before, a section you've been thinking about for a new bed of root vegetables, which store well and provide through winter in a way that the more perishable summer crops don't. You take it to Harriet. She looks at it, turns the notebook around, looks at it from the other direction. This, she says, pointing to the root vegetable section. What does this give us that we don't have? Storage, turnips, carrots, beets. They'll last in the cellar through March if stored right. She looks at it again. The cellar isn't properly dry. I know, I'm working on that. She hands the notebook back. Plant the carrots in 2 stages, she says, 3 weeks apart. You'll get a longer harvest. You had not thought of this. Yes, you say. She goes back to her stove. This, you have come to understand, is a collaboration. Harriet's kitchen and your garden has been in conversation for a year now, and the conversation has produced quietly, without announcement, a slightly better supply of food for 40 people in a county farm in Ohio. Not enough, never enough, in the terms of what this place structurally underprovides, but better, a little better. Let me bring you back to the porch. Second summer, late June. The same wooden chairs, the same view of the yard going golden in the evening light. But the people on the porch are different now, in the way that groups of people in a place like this are always different, always turning over. The longer-term residents surrounded by newer ones who are still in the early months of adjusting. Herman is still here. Herman will probably be here for a while yet. He is not dying as far as anyone can tell. He is just old and tired, and the outside world has no particular use for him, and so he is here, sitting in his chair with his bad knee and his memories of his wife's potato soup. Avery is here. Avery will also probably be here for a while. He has, if anything, become more intellectually active over the 2 years, not less. He has started giving informal lectures to whoever will listen on Sunday afternoons, history mostly, occasional natural philosophy, once an extended discussion of the mathematics of celestial navigation that drew 6 people and went for 2 hours. Greer does not approve of this, but he hasn't explicitly forbidden it, because forbidding a retired schoolteacher from talking about history on Sunday afternoons is a level of pettiness that even Greer won't claim. 2 new men on the porch tonight. Brothers, as it turns out, or half-brothers, they clarify carefully, named Edgar and William, who arrived last month from a failed farm in Allen County. They are 71 and 68 respectively, and they still have the manner of men who are not quite sure this is real, who are treating their current situation as temporary in a way that suggests they haven't been here long enough to stop. You remember feeling that. You watch Edgar look at the road. He's looking the way you looked, your first months, with the quality of a man who is still calculating, still measuring the distance back, still believing that if the right combination of circumstances arose, the road would lead somewhere useful. You don't tell him that this stops. He'll know soon enough. And maybe it won't stop for him. Maybe something will change. It does occasionally. But you don't tell him. You let him look at the road. The light is long tonight. The Ohio summer evening doing its slow work. The sky moving through colours. The elm tree at the edge of the yard holding all the day's heat in its leaves and beginning, just barely, to release it into the cooler night air. An owl calls from somewhere behind the barn. Single note, long, then silence, then again. You listen to it. Here is what you know as the second summer moves toward its end, and your second Ohio autumn begins to prepare itself in the longer nights and the changed quality of the air. You are still Thomas Hale. Not in spite of this place. Not by fighting it. Not by refusing the reality of it, but because Thomas Hale is not a thing that depends on a county's recognition or a ledger entry or the presence or absence of comfort. Thomas Hale is the hands that can look at a board and know whether it's true, the eye that reads a room for its structural logic, the particular patience with physical problems that comes from 41 years of addressing them. The stubbornness, which Clara always called stubbornness though you preferred persistence, that keeps you in front of a difficult joint until it fits. These things did not require Kenton to be true. They do not require this county farm to be false in order to persist. You are the person you were in the house you built and the church you steepled and the barn you raised. You are also the person who repaired this barn roof and fixed this kitchen window, and showed an 8-year-old girl how to feel the grain of the wood and read it. Both of these are true. You can hold both. And what about the rest of it? The cold, the thin food, the numbered steaks, the inspector who didn't look, and the system that required him not to look, and the county that designed the system, and the America that designed the county. You can hold that too. Not comfortably. not without anger, though the anger is quiet and old now. A deep anger rather than a surface one. The kind that doesn't flare and burn, but that is simply present. A structural element of how you understand the world. You can hold the injustice and the beauty simultaneously, the way Ohio itself holds them. The same land that produces this golden evening light also produces the February cold that killed Frederick Baum. The same system that built the first Methodist in Kenton also built this poor farm. The same America that will build the bridges Ezra Whitfield wanted to see also built the county farm bidding system. These are not contradictions that resolve. They are the actual shape of the thing. You've been a carpenter long enough to know that some structures are not perfect and can still stand. That what looks like contradiction from up close looks like architecture from far enough away. The owl calls again. A different note this time, or maybe the same one, heard differently in the changed light. Inside the building, the bell for supper rings. You stand up. Your hip this evening is manageable. Your hands are warm from the day. You have a second blanket for winter, and 2 letters in your breast pocket, and a photograph that has been within 3 inches of your ribs for 360 some days. You have corn mush and salt pork ahead of you, and Herman Schultz across the table, and the sound of 40 people eating the meal that Harriet made from the materials available to her, doing what she always does, which is applying complete attention to whatever she is making, the way your wife made potato soup, the way certain people bring the full weight of themselves to bear on the thing directly in front of them. There is something in that worth calling good. Not enough, but something. You go in for supper. You're upstairs by 9. The dormitory in August is warm the right way. Not the cold held-in brick of winter, not the oven heat of a July midday, but the genuine warmth of a building that has absorbed a good summer day and is releasing it slowly into the night. Arthur is already asleep. Herman is settling in with the careful routine of a man who's been doing this long enough to have ritual. The coat hung on the peg, the shoes set parallel under the bed, the blanket arranged with the specific fold that he has decided is correct and will not deviate from. You sit on the edge of the bed. The ropes still tilt the mattress slightly. You've been meaning to re-rig the bed frame for months, and somehow the other work has always been more urgent. Maybe this week. You pull off your boots. The leather is cracked at the toe of the right one. A crack you have been managing with oil, but that will eventually need to be resolved if the county sees fit to provide for that, which it will or it won't. You set them under the bed, parallel, because you have learned from Herman. You take the photograph out of your breast pocket. Clara, Ruth, age 9. The ghost of James in Ruth's chin. You look at it in the last of the day's light coming through the small window. 41 years since you married Clara. 39 since Ruth was born. 26 since James died at Spotsylvania. All of it carried forward in this rectangle of paper. You put it back. Outside the window, Hardin County, Ohio is doing its August evening business. Somewhere down the road, a dog is barking with the rhythmic insistence of a dog who has identified something worth noting. The elm tree is full of the sound of cicadas, that high continuous shimmer that is August's specific sound, the sound of summer at peak, just at the moment before it begins to turn. You have heard this sound 68 times. It still means something. The cicadas do not care about county farms or per capita payments or numbered stakes in a graveyard. They have their own timeline, their own urgent business, their own returning. Some things do not change. The light through the window is the last of it now. The blue that comes after gold. The blue that already has night in it. Your hands rest on the blanket, not aching, not working, just resting. The ropes of the bed hold you at their particular angle, and you've stopped noticing the angle. You've stopped noticing a lot of things here that once required noticing. The smell of the building, for instance. You noticed it every day for months. Every morning, coming in from outside, the smell would register again as you passed through the door. Now it doesn't, or rather it does, but it has become simply the smell of here. The way every building eventually becomes the smell of itself. The way the house on Elm Street in Kenton smelled of Clara's cooking, and your sawdust, and the particular Ohio damp that came through the window in spring. The smell of a place where you live. This is where you live. The cicadas rise and fall. The dog down the road finishes his thoughts and goes quiet. Hermann, across the room, settles into his sleeping breath. The long regular sound of an old man who has learned to sleep through whatever the night brings. You close your eyes. Tomorrow there will be work. The carrots Harriet suggested planting in 2 stages. The second stage needs to go in. The drainage issue on the east side has been building again after last week's rain, and you've been watching it, and it's time to address it before it gets into the foundation. There's also the matter of the furnace, which you told Carlotte about in October, and which Carlotte told Greer about, and which Greer has been weighing against the cost of having a furnace man come from Kenton. A calculation that you expect will resolve itself when the first truly cold week arrives and the inadequacy becomes unavoidable rather than just theoretical. Tomorrow there will be corn mush. Tomorrow there will be supper with Hermann and maybe Avery and the August evening on the porch. Tomorrow there will be 40 human beings doing what 40 human beings in a place they didn't choose do. Persist with whatever grace and skill and stubbornness is available to them. But that's tomorrow. Let it go now. The county road, the courthouse in Kenton, the paper you signed, let it go. The graveyard behind the elm trees, the numbered stakes, the names that Carlotte sometimes paints on them when he has time and something in him. That won't settle for a number. Let it go. The cold coming, the second winter, the hip in February, let it go. Let the barn roof hold. Let the garden grow. Let Ruth's letter stay warm in your pocket. Breathe. The deep kind. The kind that comes when the body finally agrees with you that the day is over. Your hands, your calloused, arthritic, hammer-worn hands that have built more things than you can count, that have been stiff and cold and burning and exhausted and covered in sawdust and oak shavings and the fine white powder of a freshly planed board. Your hands are still, just resting, doing nothing, just being the hands that they are. And that's enough. It is enough. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. You are here, still Thomas Hale, still a man who can look at a structure and understand it, still a man who carries the people he loves against his ribs. Still, centuries from now, people will drive past fields in Ohio and not know what stood there, will not know the names of the people who were managed in those buildings, will not know about the numbered stakes or the inspections that didn't look at the pest house, or the molasses that appeared only when the inspector came. Will not know about Frederick Baum or Ezra Whitfield, or the 8-year-old girl named Clara, who took a hand plane and felt the grain of the wood for the first time and understood something about what it means to make a thing. But the work they do, those future people, the buildings they fix and the gardens they tend and the hard mathematics they apply to the question of what we owe each other. That conversation started here. in the long argument between what is cheapest and what is right, in the surveys and the reports and the Agnes Whitakers who came with their notebooks and wrote down what a man like you told them, in the language of a carpenter, specifically, accurately, without embellishment, in the accumulation of evidence that eventually became impossible to ignore, in the Social Security Act signed 45 years from this August evening, in every subsequent argument about what the old and the poor and the vulnerable deserve, which is not charity and not the minimum viable, but the full human treatment, which is a thing this country is still deciding. The argument is not over, but it moved. You moved it. One barn roof at a time. Sleep now. Let the cicadas have the night. Let Herman breathe his slow breath. Let Ohio hold the dark the way Ohio holds everything, with that particular flat Midwestern patience, the patience of a place that has seen hard winters and still comes back in April with that smell of returning. Let the photograph stay warm. Let Ruth read by lamplight in Columbus, 22 miles and a world away, writing the next letter. Let Clara be wherever Clara is. Let James be at rest. Your breathing slows and finds its long, deep rhythm, the one that doesn't require thought, the one that was there before you were Thomas Hale and will be there, in some form, in some version of the world that has nothing to do with county farms or numbered stakes, long after. The breathing that is just the body doing what bodies do when they are finally fully allowed to rest. Just that. Good night.